Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. I'm a big fan of Kiss Looms. I greatly enjoy mine, and I am cooperating with Kelly at Kiss Looms to make you a playlist of all the basic techniques that you might ever want to know on all of the looms. So welcome and enjoy.
Let's talk about knit two together and slip slip knit. They are abbreviated K2tog for together and SSK. And in hand knitting, this is what they look like. My right hand is pointing to knit two together. My left hand is pointing to slip slip knit. They are mirror images of one another. And one produces a left-leaning decrease, the other produces a right-leaning decrease. So this is what we're trying to get on the loom. And it isn't difficult to do, but it's very difficult to read written instructions because the ones for hand knitters involve terms we don't use very much, like slipping stitches knitwise. Well, everything's knitwise for us. So let's look at it in action and clear things up. Let's take a close look at what I did here and see about reproducing it on the loom. First of all, the end two stitches are not actually involved in the decrease. This is a pretty common thing to do to keep the edges neat and have a single column of stitches running up them. I, by the way, knitted this extra loosely so you could see the stitches. I would normally knit a little more tightly than this. The intuitive thing to do in this situation then is to move the second stitch to the third peg, move the first stitch inwards so as to get rid of the space, and knit the row like that, knitting these over at the same time, which would seem to be a knit two together. And it will produce a decrease that leans in this way. And on the other side, we would do that. However, if you care which stitch is on top, and you may or may not, you will notice that in both cases of the traditional knit two together and slip slip knit, which is on the left side, the stitch that began on the outer edge is on top. That's the one we're seeing, and it does trace a line in the knitting. So if you want that to happen, let's undo what we just did. All we would need to do is lift this third stitch, place the second stitch on the peg, replace the third stitch on the original peg, but now it will get knitted behind the second stitch. So that will exactly look like my hand knitted sample. Let's do it on this end. There are circumstances where you would care and circumstances where you would not. And I don't think either one is particularly superior. So you choose yourself. This is more trouble, not a great deal more trouble, but if there are 1,000 decreases, it could seem like quite a bit. But it does produce that nice traceable line. I'm going to knit this row and do a few more decreases in this manner, and then I'll see you so you can look at it with me. What I did on the sample was decrease every other row, so let's do that again, and we'll do the same thing on this sample so they look alike. This time we'll add some refinements. If we lift stitch number 3, we can stack it on a pin just for safekeeping. Place stitch number 2, rescue stitch number 3, put it back where it belongs, and move stitch number 1 over. Same thing on the other side. If you prefer, you can just hold stitch number 3 in your fingertips while you move stitch number 2 in. Stack stitch number 3 back on it and move 1 over. Now I'm going to go ahead and knit a couple rows and decrease one more time so we have the same thing. Now that you know what I'm doing, I can talk about a couple of other issues while I do this again. First of all, we are acting as though my goal is to create a slanted decrease up a piece of knitting, as you might use for a sleeve. And in fact, you've probably seen this look on a raglan sleeve. But there is another place or two that you might use it. If eyelets are being created for lace, sometimes this technique is used, but in that case we wouldn't close up the gap. We would leave this peg empty and it would probably get a yarn over, which for us is a wrap on the next row. Another thing I haven't yet mentioned is that when you knit this row off, both of the loops on the peg that now contains 2 are knitted off together as though they were one. You can either do it like that if they lift over easily, or I will do the other one differently. Some yarns, it isn't easy to catch and knit over 2 loops at once, and there's no harm in doing it like this. 1, 2. No real difference in the results. Let's have a peek. There you go. See the outlined decrease, but the actual edge stitch, let me get something to point with, is here. And this is the one you would seam if you were seaming. And I just had the coolest idea. You can play around with it. Cast on enough stitches to make the width of a scarf. Do what I did here, a couple rows of garter stitch. Then begin decreasing. Do that for about this many decreases. Then increase every other row. Then decrease every other row. And you'd have the coolest zigzag scarf. And it's a lot of practice doing knit 2 together and slip, slip, knit. Note that my loom knitted sample actually looks much nicer than the hand knitted sample. And the reason is this one is knitted at the appropriate stitch size and spacing on the loom, where I made this one extra large and extra loose as a demo piece. But I don't think you would normally wear anything knitted quite like that.